Okay, so it's 8:03. We'll get started, and then I'm a little helpers here to admit those who come in later. Thank you everyone for joining today for our second seminar of the Women in Writing Summer Speaker Series. So first, I'll just cover some logistics, and for those who are new today and I haven't met yet, I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Ida Valavicius, and I am currently based in Montreal, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at McGill University and the Institut National du Sport du Québec, where I work in sports science, and really my fields are like biomechanics and female athlete health. Last year I was helping coach the McGill girls cross country and track and field teams as well. So on this slide too, I'm sharing all of my contact information. So if ever you have any questions throughout the summer about the logistics of the series, about the different talks and topics, or any of the speakers, you can feel free to reach out to me either on my Instagram, so personal Instagram, or the Wim_KC, which is the Instagram that I created to house all of the information for the seminar this summer, on LinkedIn, or my personal email as well. So before I begin, I just want to cover a few logistical points. So this portion of the presentation portion essentially of the talk will be recorded and posted online for anyone who missed the talk. The question and answer period, I'm not going to post it online, so that really just will remain, and anything that's discussed will remain in the space here. During the talk, you will be muted, but if you have any questions during the talk portion, you can just ask them in the chat. And then you can do that during the question and answer period as well, if you feel more comfortable doing that. During the Q&A portion, you'll be able to unmute yourself, however, and then ask your questions. And also, if you'd like, you can also turn your cameras on. Since this is a recurring series, I feel like we're going to have quite a few same people come back every week, so it'd be nice to start seeing some familiar faces. Also, one question that I do have for all of you before we begin is whether you'd like to have a mailing list for like a distribution list for information for the seminar. Right now I am posting everything just on Instagram, so all the links for the registration and then for the video as well. But I am interested if maybe having a mailing list would be easier for some of you. So then I could email all the links and information just through a mailing list as well. So I'll just leave the poll open here for a few minutes. Okay, it seems pretty, I guess, yeah, pretty unanimously that might be a yes. So you can take note of my email right now and just email me so I can add your email to the mailing list, or I will also post my email on our Instagram account, and you can email me that way as well. And tell all your friends who'd like to join maybe that they can find me, and I will add their email as well. Okay, so I will unshare my screen because we are ready to begin with our topic for today. So I just need to close that. So today I would love to introduce my good friend Amber Mosewich, who will be sharing all of her expertise on sports psychology today. So Amber is an associate professor at the University of Alberta in the Department of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation. She's a sports psychology researcher who is especially interested in examining stress, coping, and emotion, and resultant cognitive and behavioral responses within the sport domain. Amber is also very interested in self-compassion as a coping tool for athletes. She has done a significant amount of work in female athlete health and well-being as well. Prior to coming to the University of Alberta, Amber was a long sprint runner with the University of Saskatchewan Huskies, where she completed her undergraduate and master's degrees. She then moved to Vancouver, where she completed a PhD in sports psychology at the University of British Columbia. And she also got to enjoy a few years in Australia as a lecturer before coming back to Canada. So without further ado, I'll open the floor to Amber and allow her to share her presentation with us today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today, and a special thank you to Ida. I'm so glad that you've made this seminar series possible and brought us together. I think it's so important for all of us as women to support each other in reaching our goals and in sharing information and different types of support. Before I begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm logging in today from Edmonton, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis peoples, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. I'd also like to acknowledge that as a group, we all live, work, interact, and contribute in various treaty territories. And I want to extend my respect for each traditional community. Now, we all spend a great deal of time preparing as athletes to be physically ready to handle sport demands. Time is dedicated to the technical and the tactical aspects of sport. And quite often, and what is the case for probably a lot of you, there's a ton of time put in there. What I'm here today to talk about is the psychological side. So what can runners do to perform at their best and promote the skills, resources, and environments that encourage psychological well-being, growth, development, and high performance. The main directive of my program of research is to identify and figure out how to promote the psychological skills and resources that athletes need to perform to their potential, maintain their health and well-being, and have positive sport experiences. Now, people sometimes ask me what got me onto this area of research. Well, as Ida alluded to, I have a past life as an athlete, and I really saw the impact of the psychological factors on my own performance. And I also saw the impact on my training partner's performance too. And I saw the impact on our well-being as well. At that time, I was admittedly more focused on the performance bit, like how could I get more out of my sport performance and my running performance. But now, as the years have passed a bit, I've spent more time on the research and sports, like the research side of things and the applied sports psychology side of things. I'd say it'd be fair to say that my emphasis has broadened a bit. And I really feel that we need to support athletes' psychological well-being as an essential component of performance and an essential factor to help us reach our potential. So we are going to perform at our best when we are well. So I think both the performance and the mental well-being aspects are both so important. So as a field, what has sports psychology focused on in terms of supporting performance? Well, I've got this first picture up here. Those traditional mental skills are obviously something that first comes to mind. So your goal setting, self-talk, imagery or visualization, focus planning, mindfulness. So certainly that's been a major contribution. The psychological aspect can help with confidence and coping with demands, relationships with others. And a lot of it is about management. And so I'm often like, well, what are we managing? And at first in the field of sports psych, it was all about dealing with the negative. So how do we deal with stress and dwelling on losses and self-criticism and choking and anxiety? And there's still very much an emphasis on how to manage those experiences. But there's also been a shift to more of what they call the positive psychology movement. And so we now see an emphasis on enhancing the positive. So it's not just about fixing the negative things or the things that are going wrong, but also enhancing the positive. So what can we do to build our confidence and our character, enhance our focus, enhance our self-awareness? So there's two sides to it. Today's session, I was really thinking, like, what am I going to talk about in our time together? Because there's so much I'd love to share with you. But what I ended up focusing in on were sort of two areas that they're still quite related. That's the cool thing about sports psych, is it's all kind of related. But I'm going to talk about self-awareness and get us to reflect a little bit on how we respond to the demands that are placed on us. And it's my goal that hopefully we can identify what's working for us, what isn't, and what we can change for the better. And I'm really going to stress the link between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. I'm going to provide a few skills and strategies that are especially useful for runners. And one of those strategies that I'm really going to narrow in on is focus planning. So how can we maintain an optimal focus for our training and our competition? And then there'll be time at the end for questions about anything sports psych. So it doesn't have to be related to this talk. It could be any question you have on sports psych. I'll do my best to answer it. And if I can't, I will get back to you with some resources or a response. You might want to grab some paper and a pen to jot down some notes. And I have a couple of activities that I'm going to post. Likely today, just due to time, I'll talk you through them, and it would be best if you just invested a little bit of time after to work through them in more detail. But I have this QR code here, so you can just hold your phone up with the camera, and it'll bring you to a PDF file, and you should see 3 different PDF pages with some activities that you're going to see later in this talk. And now if someone joins us later, you could either direct them to that link or at each point where the slide comes up that's been included, I have the QR code on it again, so people will be able to get to it. All right, so let's talk about the sport context to begin with. So we think sport context, we could say running context, whatever we want to call it. We know that running's demanding physically and psychologically. And it's important to remember that runners will differ in how they respond to the demands placed on them. So not every runner will respond the same way to a particular event or experience. And you've probably noticed this with yourself and with your training partners. The other thing to remember is that there's sometimes when we respond differently in a similar situation, we might kind of surprise ourselves. While we can control or diminish or alleviate some demands, some are going to remain. So the reality is that the sport context does have some demands, and it's exciting because we can challenge ourselves within it, but it also means that we do need to make sure that we have the skills to manage them successfully. And the good news is that there's lots that we can do to upskill ourselves in terms of psychological strategies and coping skills to kind of prop ourselves up in that department. Now, what I'm going to talk about today, some of it may seem fairly straightforward, and it's a good thing because it is all very attainable for us. Just sometimes people forget these things, or we just need like some little subtle nudges on what we're doing and how we could best be thinking, how we could be best directing our emotions, and how we could be best reacting. So I want you to kind of think of this question as we move through this first part of the talk. How can we best respond to the demands placed on us? There's going to be some demands, like yes, we try to mitigate them as much as possible through planning, through time management, but there are times where there will just be demands. There'll be big races, there'll be tough workouts, there might be an injury, and we will differ in how we respond. And the goal would be to respond as adaptively as possible. So let's start with thinking about our own responses. We can all become aware of our typical responses in certain situations. So I know that there were, like when I think back to my athlete days, there were some days where my typical response was, to respond to excitement or be kind of anticipating perhaps a tough workout. But there were also typical responses where I would get very nervous before races, very nervous. So there was lots of anxiety to try to manage. So from there, once we know sort of our typical responses, we gain the insight to be able to evaluate what's working and what could be better. So we might identify areas where we could better support ourselves. Think about what we're doing already to support ourselves. Is it working, and what could be better? One of the main pieces that I see get overlooked in my applied work with athletes is there'll often be a plan. So a plan for coping or a plan for dealing with something. And then what gets forgotten is the evaluation part after it. So after all that demand, that stress has come and gone, we do need to pause and be like, okay, well, what did I do? What worked well? What maybe could have been better? And then we're that much more prepared for the next time. So we can make changes to ensure we're responding adaptively as possible. So think of this as supporting ourselves from the psychological perspective. So we can embed different types of mental skills, and I'll call these traditional mental skills, into our sport routine. So things like goal setting, imagery or visualization, self-talk, mindfulness, focus planning. We can also support ourselves using strong coping skills and building resilience. Coping involves strategies that we will continually evaluate and refine. And I'll talk more about that in a few slides. We can have functional appraisals. What an appraisal is, it's like the psych term for how we're perceiving or looking at the situation. We need to think about what our emotion regulation and self-regulation is doing for us. And then finally, we really need an awareness of this connection right here. Our thoughts are going to impact how we feel, and how we feel is going to impact how we act or how we behave. And the reverse is also true. How we behave or our behaviors are going to impact our feelings and our thoughts as well. This is all connected. We do all know this implicitly, but the cool thing is that we can kind of intervene or prop ourselves up in any and all of these aspects and have like a linear response with that. So kind of like a chain reaction. So let's think about our own responses here for a minute. This can just be rhetorical. You can just reflect. And I might offer a couple things that how I typically react that just kind of get us going. So how do we typically react when things don't go as planned? Well, for me, I might say it would depend on what isn't going as planned. But let's say it's when a workout goes wrong, when I don't have a great workout. Am I going to be flooded with self-doubt? So sometimes I would have doubted myself. Hopefully I could refocus and reset, which we'll talk about in this talk, but there's a variety of responses that can happen. What about when there's a delay in race time? Do I have a plan to slow down my workout or slow down my warm-up? Or embed some other aspects to keep myself warm and focused and ready without expending too much energy. How about when we have a few bad workouts or races in a row? There can be a variety of responses here too, from worry again and self-doubt to perhaps trying to gather information as to why that might be, or monitoring things a bit more closely. My point here is that there's a ton of different responses, and we probably have more than one response. But the key is are these responses going to help us through these tough times? So there's some things to consider here in terms of our overall response. And the first key consideration has to do with appraisals. So remember, appraisal is that psych term for how we're perceiving or how we're seeing the situation. So how are we perceiving the situation? Are we seeing the situation as really threatening, or are we seeing it as a challenge? This is kind of cool because it's really a shift in interpretation, right? So our appraisals, it's how we're perceiving or interpreting the situation. And we can train ourselves to rethink something that we previously thought of as a threat to more of a challenge. So maybe the delay in race time, I'm seeing it as a threat to my performance. I'm quite anxious about it. I could revisit it to a challenge, know that this is going to up my experience as a runner, because we all know that meet delays can happen. And I can challenge myself to think of it more as a growing experience as an athlete. Now, research has found out some really cool stuff about how we appraise situations, some really cool stuff. So our body actually responds in a different physiological way, depending on whether we're thinking about things as a threat or as a challenge. So when we think of something as a threat, we have a lot of vasoconstriction. So everything in our cardiovascular system is now running a little bit less efficiently. With a challenge appraisal, people tend to show more vasodilation in their cardiovascular system, improving cardiovascular efficiency. So this is super key for sport and for running. I won't go into too much of the physiological aspects of it, but essentially we have a better physiological response when we think of things as a challenge. Another part of appraisals is us interpreting or thinking about whether or not we have the resources to meet the demand. So this is where we kind of take inventory of our toolbox. So what could we do? What kind of support could we need? So the meet's running late. Okay, like what could I do? Could I slow down my warm up? Should I check in with my coach? Could I do some visualization? Should I get an extra layer of clothes on to stay warm? These are all the things that I could possibly do. So I'm kind of taking stake of the situation. What can I actually do here? Our second consideration is coping, and coping is all about what we're going to do to manage the demand. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots of possible strategies that we can do. For example, I gave you a few on the last slide. So as I was taking inventory, some other ones could be to do a mindfulness meditation. It could be to go for a bit of a jog or do some stretching with a teammate and get our minds off the delay for a little bit. There's all these different types of strategies. They're like uncountable. We can kind of look at them as categorized into a couple of different categories. And two of the main ones are problem focused and emotion focused. So our strategies aimed at solving a problem, so staying warm, putting on more layers, or are they aimed at managing emotions? So managing perhaps some anxiety about the delay in the start time, and maybe the solution is going to be to use some self-talk or visualization. One isn't necessarily better than the other. The important thing to remember is certain strategies are effective in certain situations, and sometimes they're not. The key really is that we need to look at what's working and what isn't. We need to know that just because we're coping, it doesn't mean that we're coping well. So just because we're doing something, it doesn't always mean that it is the best way to go about it. Likely you've chosen some things based on your past experience that are going to work super well, but it is important to evaluate your coping after the event happens. So did your coping strategy alleviate the demand or reduce the distress? That would mean it's working pretty well, obviously. And what will you continue to do and what will you change moving forward? So sometimes there are extra things that we maybe could have done that we think about in hindsight that we can now put back into our toolbox for the next time. Key consideration 3, your emotions. Now, this is one I talk about with athletes that I work with all the time. Emotions are a part of being human. They shouldn't control us. They shouldn't be the ones driving the bus, but we want to work with emotions rather than against them. And here I'm not talking about like clinical levels of anxiety where someone has a clinical diagnosis and the anxiety is really getting in the way of their day-to-day life. I'm talking about that nervousness and the butterflies that often come in advance of a really hard workout or a really big race. It is normal to feel a certain degree of anxiety or nervousness. It's your brain's way of saying this is important to me, right? Like this is something that's important. The way we appraise a situation can help with the intensity of that emotion. So if we can try to reframe it as a bit more of a challenge than a threat, that can help reduce our anxiety levels. We can use different relaxation strategies. We can use some breathing exercises. You can use some keywords to remind yourself to breathe and calm down. And then also some level of acceptance can be really helpful too. Just knowing that it is normal to have some butterflies, to have some nervousness before you get to the line, and it can even be your body's way of letting you know you're activated and ready to go. So we can interpret things in a lot of different ways. There's this really cool quote by Coach Donahue, who used to coach the Canadian national basketball team. And I love this quote because it just resonates with me so much. It said, it's not a case of getting rid of the butterflies. It's a case of getting them to fly in formation. So it's not that we can get rid of all emotion, but you want your emotion to work for you, fly in formation. All right, key consideration for our behaviors. So our behaviors are also known as our actions, and we could also say AKA our reactions. So we've already talked about appraisals and how we're thinking. So consider our appraisals and our thoughts. How do they make us feel and react? Consider our emotions. How do they make us think and react? And consider our behaviors and our actions, and how do they make us think and feel? That goes back to that diagram at the very start. How we think impacts how we feel, and how we feel is going to impact our behaviors. And the reverse is true as well. Our behaviors impact our emotions, which impact how we think. So what we need to do as athletes is really think about how we can get our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to put us in a place that supports rather than hinders our goals. So what can we do to get into a good emotional state, to get into a state where we're thinking thoughts that are going to work for us? This is also really important in terms of times when a mistake or a setback happens. It allows us to learn from them a bit more quickly and avoid that really negative spiral that some athletes report. In a lot of my research, athletes have reported having quite strong mental skills in a lot of areas, but the self-criticism thing is really hard to deal with, and the rumination or dwelling that comes with that is also tough. So a little sidebar, women athletes often report super high levels of self-criticism. And in some of the athletes I've worked with in research and applied settings, some of them are really quick to say, you know what, I'm self-critical, and that's why I'm a good runner, and that's why I'm a good athlete, and that's why I am where I am. And what I challenge you to kind of think about is that there's a difference between harsh self-criticism and constructive evaluation. Research has shown that harsh self-criticism, where you berate yourself, you kind of tear yourself down, it doesn't predict higher levels of motivation. It doesn't predict good focus. It actually detracts focus from where it should be. It also hinders the ability to see things really objectively and know where the issues are, because subconsciously we try to protect ourselves from that harsh self-criticism. So when we're really, really self-critical, sometimes we protect ourselves by kind of overlooking some of the key details because we don't want to be really hard on ourselves. So my suggestion for all athletes is, it's not that we don't want to evaluate ourselves. We definitely want to look at things critically, but in a more constructive way. So what's the issue? What do I need to do? What's my plan moving forward? Versus, I had a bad workout, I'm a terrible runner, this is never going to get better. And those sort of loops that really don't solve anything and don't push anything forward. So what can you do to support yourself? When you're performing well, what are you typically thinking and feeling? And is this helpful? I'm going to assume that we can reflect on a time when you've been performing really well. And I just want you to think about what your thoughts were at that time, what you were feeling. The next time you have a really good workout, maybe take note of what you were thinking, what you were feeling. What was your self-talk during that time? So what should you keep trying to do? Were there some things that you did beforehand to get especially positive or focused for the workout? You can also think about the flip side and identify some areas where you might need to make some changes. So if you are performing well, what are some typical thoughts and feelings that you can maybe try to change? Now, let's evaluate our coping here. This is one of the QR codes. So if you joined us a little late, if you take your phone and the camera and go up to that little QR code there, you'll get a PDF copy of this. This is something that I'd like you to work through after this session today. As you consider a recent demand, thinking about what you were doing leading up to it and during it, I ask you about your appraisals and your coping, what worked and what didn't work, and then what you're going to do moving forward. So this worksheet's designed to help you think about what your appraisals and your coping strategies are, and then evaluate them a bit. Because remember, that evaluation piece is the one that often gets missed. We think a lot about what we could do, and then kind of the demand passes and we forget to be like, hey, did that work as well as it could? What should I do moving forward? I also have one more activity, and it's on proactive coping. So when we say we're being proactive, we're kind of planning in advance. So I want you to think about a time or some kind of demand that you foresee in the future. So maybe it's my example, maybe it's a race delay. Think in advance about some options for coping. Is there anything that you're going to need in terms of support to execute your coping options? Do you need to upskill yourself in any way? Do you need support from others? And then how are you going to remember your plan so you don't forget to use it? So what's your cue to remember to use it when that demand comes up? So some things we can plan for in advance can really save us a lot of stress on practice or competition day. And remember too, when we make a plan, we need to evaluate it. We often forget. I forget all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to go back and think about whether or not that worked. All right, to finish up this talk, I have a few slides on focus, because I think focus and attention is really key in terms of the psychological side of getting the most out of your training. I always say you need to train like you compete. I have a little asterisk there. I know that some things are a bit different, but we want to go into each workout psychologically prepared, like we'd be psychologically preparing for a race. We want to go into each workout physically prepared. We want to go into each workout hydrated and properly fueled in terms of nutrition. So we do need to have a good level of focus throughout our entire season, not just on race day. We also all know that some workouts take a lot of focus to get through. So the focus and the prep needs to be there all the time. And the more we practice it, the better we get at it and the easier it is to do. And this goes for non-running domains too. It goes for schoolwork. It goes for other performance pursuits like music. So it is a really important skill. And keeping our focus often requires some form of self-regulation. What self-regulation really is like, it's like a self-management. So being able to keep ourselves on track. So in terms of attention, at any given point, there are a lot of items that we could attend to. Not everything is going to enter our conscious experience. So we're not probably consciously thinking about breathing right now, but maybe we are during a workout. We want what we're attending to be relevant. And sometimes we just have to withdraw from some things to better attend to others. So I'm not on my phone right now, so I can focus on what I'm saying to you. So there's these different distractors within our environment. And attention's really multidimensional. So sometimes we talk about attention in terms of concentration. So this is when we like deliberately decide to invest some mental effort on something that seems important at the time. So we might concentrate on what the coach is saying about the course that we're going to run or about the workout. We might look at selective perception. So zoning in on task relevant information while ignoring distractions. So your selective perception might allow you to hear split times from your coach, but not worry about the cute puppy that's kind of by the long jump pit. And then we have this divided attention. If we practice a lot, we can sometimes do actions concurrently. As human beings, we all, like if we voted and like everyone rated themselves on their ability to multitask, we all rate ourselves as pretty high. The reality is we all aren't that great at it. Like it's best if we don't divide our attention, especially on like important, intense tasks. So what causes poor attention? Well, we can be distracted either from like our internal thoughts. So maybe it's things like being worried about an upcoming exam or something. It could be an external distractor, maybe what happened in the heat before us. And then the inability to attend. So the lack of mindfulness, the lack of being able to be in the present moment. So there's lots of situations where attention's often disrupted after we make a mistake, during high stress, when we're not motivated or when we're over motivated. So really think about what impacts your attention. For me, making a mistake and high stress do impact my attention, and I need to do often some breathing skills or use some cues to bring myself back because I do find my mind will wander. So a tip with the focus stuff is avoid focusing too much on factors outside of your control. Shifting attention to factors outside of your control prevents focusing on relevant cues for current performances. So if you're worrying about a future performance, for example, or a future race, when you're in your workout, it's not going to be that helpful. So think about what you can do, what you can focus on right now that's going to help you achieve your goal. So what is relevant right now? I'm going to share with you a few strategies to stay focused that I've used with athletes in the past. Attentional cues, TikTok, and focus plans. And sometimes they're called pre-performance or performance routines. There are lots of focus strategies, but for time, I just wanted to run through a few quick ones. Strategy one are attentional cues. So sometimes athletes will use visual, verbal, or kinesthetic cues to focus their concentration and refocus once it's been lost. So the key is like a bit of a reminder to focus on the task at hand and avoid or detach from distracting thoughts and feelings. So we want to focus on the positive, obviously not the negatives, the present, not the past or the future, and the process, not the outcome. So what are we actually doing? Not like thinking about winning or crossing the line first. Now, these need to be quite individualized. I had one athlete that I worked with. She just tapped the side of her thigh twice really quickly. No one would even have noticed it. But it was her kind of cue to bring herself back more to the present. She also had a verbal cue to think about process as opposed to outcome. And what she would do was cue something that she needed to be focused on. So she would always say quick legs. You can also use a strategy called TikTok. So not like actual TikTok, but this TikTok that came before the social media TikTok. So a tick is any self-statement or thoughts that's irrelevant to the immediate task. So my tick might be, I'm tired or I'm falling behind, something like that. The talk is switching to more task relevant focus. So if I'm like tick, oh, I'm falling apart, I'm feeling pretty tired, talk might be keep driving your arms, or just simply drive. So this strategy means you need to become aware of like your ticks, so those self-statements that don't help you, and think about how you can turn them into talks. What are you going to say instead? So it's about using self-talk to your advantage. Strategy 3 is pre-performance and performance routines or focus plans. These are essentially protocols to use during warm-up, practice, and different times during competition that get your body and your mind ready for performance. The idea here is to get yourself to your good state of activation level, get your mind thinking where it should be, get your focus where it should be. And then we can also use focus plans to bring our attention back if our focus lapses. Now, I guarantee that probably everyone on this call already has some kind of a pre-performance routine, because I'm willing to bet that you have a fairly, like somewhat of a structured warm-up. So that would be a pre-performance routine. And it's awesome in running because we can use that pre-performance routine to build in some psychological strategies, maybe some other physical strategies to make sure that we are at the state that we need to perform at our best. We can integrate mental skills to refine our plans further. So we might integrate visualization to energize or relax or focus on something that we're working on during, and we could do that during some point of our warm-up. We could use self-talk, so either instructional cues like keep things quick or sharp, motivational cues like keep it going or you got this. You can put that into your warm-up routine and also your performance routine as well. I like putting goal setting in the pre-performance routines as well, so athletes can be reminded of what the goal for the session is. So it might be prior to going for your warm-up jog or right after it, you remind yourself what your key goals are for the day. So we need to start by identifying the key factors we need to focus on to get to the right physical and mental state to train or compete. What you need to do before, during, and after your practices and your competitions. So notice this isn't just for competitions. You can use these for practice as well. And I think it's really important too. And it's all about supporting yourself to getting to that optimal state of focus. And if you have a plan right now, is it effective? Sometimes plans need to change because they aren't working, or maybe the situation changes. So you've got to change accordingly. So we need to be able to adapt. We can also set an overall focus plan. So this involves getting a bit of a game plan for sport that allows you to build on your strengths and cope with your weaknesses. So I kind of call it a troubleshooting guide in case something goes wrong. So it's sort of like that proactive coping. So if something happens, what am I going to do about it? And also highlights what's relevant, which will direct our attention and concentration, or hopefully will direct it to where it should be. So remember, we really need to focus on what we can control, first of all. And we also want to consider how we're setting up our focus for not just competition, but our practices as well. This is just a bit of a summary slide. So our game plan or our focus plan can help us build on our strengths. So remind us to use our strengths, or maybe some of our mental skills, some of our physical things that we're reminded of. Manage our weaknesses. So think ahead to some potential demands or stressors and how we might deal with them. Can highlight what's important. So what should we be focusing on when? A lot of athletes find that this helps with confidence because they're prepared, they've thought ahead, they've planned things out. And it can help with our focus and our activation because we're purposefully and systematically putting our attention on certain areas at different times. So what can we do to be more focused? One of my suggestions is to build your own focus plan. And I'm going to share a few examples with you. These are fairly basic. What I will say is try to make them your own, but these are what some of them can look like. So a pre-competition or competition plan, you could modify this for training. So this one would be for a competition. So what are you going to do the night before, the morning of, at the competition site? You might want to say a specific time, your mental and physical prep. You might have some notes. Just before the race, during the race, immediately after the race, later in the day. All these categories might not be relevant for you, but it's thinking in advance about what do I need to do mentally and physically to perform at my best. Now, I could change race to practice, and you could think about it that way as well. So what do you need to do before practice to make sure that you're going to have a good workout? What do you want to do after practice to make sure that you're supporting your physical recovery and your psychological development? I've worked with some athletes that like to plan a lot of things. So this would be like your calendar on your computer, and they'd fill in all of their tasks for the day and what they're going to focus on when. So this could also include things like schoolwork, meals, meal prep. So there's lots of different examples here. So this is like a more detailed one. You could also scale it back and just write different times. So it might be like 7 o'clock, get out of bed, 7:30 breakfast, 7:45, some meditation, and you're just planning what you're going to do when. So the key here is to individualize them so things work for your needs, and you can obviously shift it in the future. It's a chance for you to be creative too. So those of you that like to journal, like to write, or like to make cool things on the computer, you could set this up in any way, shape, or form. It's essentially like scheduling what you need to focus on when. Focus plans can also take a less like time attached structure. So we might create focus plans. Maybe the issue is, the issue might be losing focus during a workout. What could your solution be? I usually ask athletes to try to come up with an alternative as well. So maybe the solution is to use some self-talk. Maybe the alternative is to go back and look at goal setting prior to the session. There could be other places where your focus gets thrown. We could go back to the delayed race as well. What are some solutions to get your focus back? It could be some time alone doing some visualization. So it's all around identifying places where you lose your focus and then what you can do to get it back. You could also do focus cues. So I gave you one, that one athlete did a double tap on her thigh. It could be a cue word. So something that when you notice that your focus is kind of going somewhere else, what do you want to do? What do you want to say to yourself or do to bring it back? Sometimes I suggest to start with a cue word that is linking to what it is you're supposed to do right now. So just self-talk inside your head. You need to evaluate your plan as well. So was every aspect included in the plan that it should be? If not, what was missing and what could be included? Any aspects need to be changed? If so, how? And should your other plans be modified as well? What do you find the most effective? And could this be implemented into any of your other plans? So maybe you found something really effective in your pre-practice plan. Maybe you put it into your pre-competition plan as well. And then was the plan practical? And if not, what could be changed? So was it actually usable? I'm going to finish with this thought. I call it an attentional pie. We only have a finite amount of attention. So I want you to think about how you're going to use it to your advantage. So we only have so much. Doesn't matter who we are. We only have so much. So how are we going to use it to our advantage? A few takeaways. That relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions. Our appraisals are how we're perceiving or interpreting the situation is important. Self-awareness matters. What's working? What could stand to change? There's a difference between harsh self-criticism and constructive evaluation. And attention is not unlimited. How could we best use our focus? Your final PDF slide that you have is this start, stop, keep. And I'd like you to do this after the talk as well. I want you to write one thing you're going to start doing based on what we've talked about today, one thing you're going to stop doing based on what we talked about today, and one thing you're going to keep doing based on what we talked about today. And with that, I'm going to stop. I'll say thank you. I'll see if there's any questions. That's my email address. I'm happy for you to contact me at any point with questions or comments, and I will now open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Amber. That was awesome.